everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend. I'm with eLearning Brothers. Today we're going to be talking about the periodic table of instructional design. This is part 2. We will send out links to part 1 in the follow-up email, and we'll also post that in the webinar recap later in the week. This webinar will be recorded and we'll post that online. We'll also get a copy of it sent out to everybody who's in attendance here today. If you have questions during the webinar, we'll be ready to answer your questions in the questions panel. I'll try to bring those up to Jen, our presenter. And if we can't get to all of your questions, we'll try to reach out to you afterwards or make sure those questions are answered elsewhere. Just so you know, one of the things we like to do after the webinar is try to follow up as soon as possible. Sometimes it's just to get feedback. Most of the time we would like to touch base and find out if anyone needs some one-on-one clarification about our webinar topics after the fact. Also, we're going to be giving everyone in attendance a free eLearning Brothers account if you don't already have one. So you can be checking for that in your email, and look forward to that. One last thing that I want to mention before I turn the time over to our presenter: we are giving away 15 iPads in December, and you can register for those on our website. I'll post a link at the end. I'll tell you guys more about that at the end, but I just want to let you guys know right now we're giving away 15 iPads in December, and you can register to get one of those. All right, so we have Jen Fairbanks, our Senior Instructional Designer, with us today. Thanks for joining us, Jen. We're excited to hear what you have to say, and without further ado, I will pass the screen over to you. In Jen's defense, we did give her a new monitor today. All right, great. That looks better.
Oh, goodness. Technology company and stuff. Okay, we're going to go over the other 5 elements of instructional design that are kind of our favorites, or at least the ones that are going to make the biggest impact with the least amount of effort, those quick wins to make a big difference to your e-learning course. For those that haven't already seen it, this is our periodic table of instructional designs. This is available on the website for you to download if you want to print and download a copy of it on your own. We actually have a handful of them here in the office, and we refer to them quite often. It's pretty handy. So for those of you that want it and want to use it as a tool, it's available on the website for you. So let's get started. Here are the elements that we're going to talk about today. We have cognition, variety, bad visuals, incremental sign-offs, and warm handoffs. So the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to start with a poll question. How do you make sure your participants are learning? Do you pack your courses with enough stuff so that you can make sure that they learn something, you know, images and text and as much as you can cram in there to make sure they walk away with something? Do you create interactions to make them think and apply the information? Do you do pre and post course assessments? And if their scores improve, then they've probably learned something, hopefully, or you're not really sure if they're learning. The real goal is to check the box.
So I'll go ahead and put that information up on the screen so you guys can click right on it to vote and give us your thoughts and opinions on this one. There's already quite a few of you who have voted already in the few seconds it's been up, and I'm seeing a lot of you agreeing on the same answer, but keep voting. Let's see if that changes. We'll give you guys about 5 more seconds here. And all right, we'll close those out, and here's those results. So 70% of our audience, Jen, says that they create interactions that make them think. 16% say that they do pre and post course assessments. 8% say that they don't know what they're learning. And 6% say that they pack their courses with images and text.
Okay, so definitely a little bit more variety than I anticipated. Hopefully it's maybe a combination of B and C, really more often than not. But let's take a look. So the reality is that even if you're not doing pre and post course assessments, there are things that you can do within your course in order to hopefully make sure that they're learning. If the learner isn't thinking about what it is that they're doing within the course, if they're not taking the information, wrapping it around in their brain and making it their own, they're not creating those connection points and those things within their brain in order to retain it, recall and retain it later in their moment of need, and that's ideally what we want to have happen. So we want to make sure that we're designing our courses that the learner has to think about and actually apply the information, not just click a next button. And it doesn't have to be anything elaborate. Even in some of my courses, if I know that maybe we're a little bit strapped for time, or we already have a lot packed in there, I might even just have a moment of pause or a reflection question in there, and just ask them to pause and think about it. But let's take a look at some ways that you can make cognition happen within your course. For this particular example, it's pretty simple. It's a drag and drop. The way that the interaction works is that the learner has 6 potential possibilities based on the information that they've already been presented in the course, and their goal is to identify the example that most closely matches what this particular character wants to have happen. When they drag the information, they drop it on the correct location, or they drop it on this particular box, and then they're given immediate feedback. If it's a correct answer or one that's aligned with what we're looking towards, their meter over on the right-hand side will go up, and they'll have fireworks and all kinds of stuff go off. It doesn't need to be that fancy and that extravagant or elaborate, but at least it's some kind of a feedback. It could even be something as simple. It wouldn't even need to be a meter. It could be like you're correct, or something along those lines. Just something to give them that immediate feedback, to let them know that they're going in the right direction, or maybe if they're not going in the right direction, a tip or a hint of something that can help get them on that right track. A next example of this is a little bit more elaborate. With this particular interaction, we gave them the opportunity to think like a chief. We created a simulated role, a chief priorities officer. And the goal with this particular activity was we wanted the new hires to an organization to think like the leadership within the organization and make decisions like they would. And so we created this interaction where they were given a certain budget, and they had to make decisions that were aligned with that budget. And each decision that they made took money or resources from their resources bank. And it just helped them to realize that as much as they want to approve every project, it may not align with the priorities, and so it gave them a realistic sense of what leaders do. So that's an example of getting them to apply the information in a course. This is another simple example of cognition. It doesn't need to be anything fancy or extravagant. This is a simple slider, and as the slider moves up and down the scale, they're able to see different units of measurement change. This is obviously a simplistic example, and maybe taken something from more of a K through 12 type of training, or learning, but it gets you kind of thinking of the different ways that you can present information and get them to apply it. And then here's another example. With this particular example, a really simple interaction. Again, it's a drag and drop. And as you're looking at these, the other thing to think about is, these are drag and drop activities, but they don't necessarily look like a typical drag and drop. You've got characters, you've got a lot going on here, a lot for the learner to actually kind of digest and kind of wrap their brain around. So even though it is a drag and drop, it's a more advanced drag and drop, and you're really giving the learner the opportunity to think about what's going on and apply the information.
So there's a quick question here about
Sure.
drag and drops. Christine says we recently had to publish all of our courses as HTML5 files instead of SWFs, and the drag and drop function doesn't work anymore. Any suggestions for that?
So suggestions as far as alternate activities or just something different? I think it depends. Maybe it's something more along the lines of getting them to think about the information. I think the biggest thing when it comes to the drag and drops and the exercises within the course is simulating as much as possible what they're going to be doing in real life, right? So if the way that the courses are being set up, you're no longer able to do drag and drops and activities within the course, maybe that might be a situation to where it becomes more of a blended learning experience. So depending on what the topic is, maybe you have them go through the initial information in an e-learning course where you're presenting the information, giving them a high-level overview, and then maybe you're taking it offline and having discussions or giving them a chance to practice whatever it might be in a real-time environment. Without knowing a little bit more of the specifics, it's kind of hard to say of what those activities might be, but maybe look for alternative ways where the e-learning solution isn't the only solution, and maybe it's more of a blended approach. Okay, so let's, I hope that answered your question. If not, maybe type in the comments and we can, I can elaborate a little bit further, or we can even follow up offline with some examples of interactions that might work moving to that HTML5 environment. Okay. We are going to our next poll question. Actually, before we do that, any questions or additional thoughts on cognition, ways that you guys have found that you really leverage cognition in order to make your courses really help the learners apply the information as they're going through it? Go ahead and put your questions in the chat.
So you're taking the questions?
Yeah.
All right, there's a couple questions that have come up here. The first one is, how would you think through cognition in a course where most of the thinking is done, IDE, practicing programming?
That's a good question. Maybe give them some examples of exercises that would be applied in real life. So maybe give them some practice exercises. You could even potentially send exercises or activities out ahead of time and then allow them to work on them ahead of time, and then potentially provide the answers within the course itself, showing them what the correct answers are and how it actually gets worked out. There's also the possibility of maybe creating a sandbox environment and allowing them to try it out within the course itself. But trying to replicate that within the course as much as possible, and then maybe leveraging outside of the e-learning environment to do some of that pre or post work.
There's not so much a question, but a comment from Monica. I found interviewing some of the users to see what options they would have chosen, incorrect and correct, to put as possible answers, not just random possible responses. So that's a fun idea. Another question here is, can you recommend ways to quickly create activities that increase cognition?
Yep. So one of the things that we have here at eLearning Brothers with our template library, but then also within our custom side as well, is we almost create like a bank of templates that we can leverage. So once you create one, then you have it for future use, and if you want to modify it or make changes to it, you can quickly do that. Don't get me wrong, you've got that initial investment at the beginning, and you have to be okay knowing that, hey, you know what, I might spend a little bit more time on this one now, but I'll have it moving forward. So that's an idea, and you just kind of bank those up over time. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our next poll question. How do you make your courses engaging? And this isn't a trick question. Maybe go ahead and identify your favorite way of making your courses engaging. A, you use visual creative elements to draw learners into a story. B, I leverage a variety of layouts and interactions to add diversity. C, I look for out-of-the-box ideas that can be applied to my courses. Or D, I don't. There's not a way to make the content that I am training engaging. So policy training, compliance training, software training. Go ahead and pick your most favorite way to make your course engaging. There's not a right or a wrong. I'm genuinely curious.
There may not be a right or a wrong, but there's definitely a leader here.
Oh, good. Okay.
Currently, we're at about 60% are agreeing to one of these. All right, go ahead and vote for a couple more seconds here.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll close it out. And here's those results. So like I was saying, 61% leverage a variety of layouts and interactions. 18% use creative visual elements. 16% look for out-of-the-box ideas. And 4% say they don't. Their content is boring.
Okay. For those of the 4%, maybe let's connect afterwards and see if we can, or maybe even let's take a look at some of these ideas and maybe we'll spark some ways to make some of that content a little bit more engaging. But ideally, whether it's through story, whether it's through interactive layouts, use of imagery and things like that, one of the easy ways to make the courses from being routine and repetitive and kind of boring is to keep their interest with variety, right? So even though you might have 3 drag and drops within a course, they don't necessarily need to look the same. So let's take a look at some examples. So this is a typical example of what a drag and drop activity might look like. And this is one that I created based on what our client liked. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's very functional. But there are some alternate ways to accomplish a similar type of goal. So this is what your learner might be expecting, but what if you gave them something like this? So rather than a normal drag and drop, maybe you give them the opportunity to fly paper airplanes into a trash basket. And they've got a variety of different situations, and then based on the situation or the answer to that situation, they can select the paper airplane and they can fly it into the basket. Okay, another example would be something like this. Again, it's a sorting activity, nothing really too fancy about it. They essentially drag the sticky note either to the clipboard to keep it or drag it to the trash can to throw it away. Okay, and then here's another fun one. Again, kind of a drag and drop type of activity. When they drag the component to the operation guy, they're revealed information about the effects of sleep deprivation. So just kind of a creative way. I think we used this in a course for college students. I'm not positive, but I think that's where we used it. And again, appealing to that particular demographic, something that they might relate to, that's a little bit outside of the box. We wouldn't necessarily normally think of board games and things like that as sources for inspiration, but that's one of the places that we pull our inspiration from. There was actually a course that we created, I created within the last 6 months or so. The inspiration for the course was Carmen Sandiego. So if any of you are familiar with that TV show from, gosh, it feels like forever ago, that was one of the things that I did in order to make sure that we were aligning with it. I watched Carmen Sandiego for about half an hour one day to make sure that I was pulling through the concepts right and creating that realistic story. So definitely lots of different ways to get variety and inspiration into your courses if you think a little bit outside the box.
So you showed a lot of drag and drop examples. Do you feel that mixing up the drag and drop types will take away from the feel of the course?
Take away from the feel of the course, meaning that it's not so boring, or I guess maybe I don't understand the question.
She says, I worry that the creative means is unrelated to the content, and that might be confusing.
Oh, yes. So first rule of instructional design, or one of the first rules, is to make sure whatever theme or creativity that you're putting into your course aligns back to that bigger picture. So the operation character and the Carmen Sandiego and all of that are great if it aligns with the theme or the story that you're telling with your course. If it doesn't, it's, you're going to need to use it for something else. You just, sometimes when you're starting to introduce creativity, you might have to start slow and incorporate it slowly so that your stakeholders can have that buy-in and know that you're not going to do anything that jeopardizes that learning experience, but also allows your learners to think outside the box a little bit. Here's an example of what is a different way of including some variety that's not necessarily a drag and drop. So for example, this is a comic book type of treatment, and learners are allowed to see Alex's story kind of unfold through imagery and the narrator telling the story in a background. Another example of some of that creativity is a dial interaction. So maybe it doesn't need to be a drag and drop or a click and reveal. Maybe it's a click and reveal in a different way, like a dial. So the operation interaction is probably a little bit out there if you haven't introduced some of that creativity before, but dials are pretty benign and is a different visual treatment for what your learners might be seeing, and allows them to also have a little bit of play within the course because they can move the dial around and have a little bit of fun with it. So that's an option as well. Any other questions about variety before we move on to our next topic?
There's quite a few questions about how'd you do this? What tool did you use for this? How do I do this in my tool? And for the sake of time, we're not going to address those this time. I think Jen can answer those later. We'll get those posted later. But as far as the variety, I think we're good right now.
Okay, great. And one thing that I will say with the variety really quickly is a lot of the tools look for ways that you can leverage some of the native interactions that are already within the tool and maybe dress it up a little bit. For example, some of the tools recently came out with the dial interaction and things like that. So look for ways that you can leverage functionality that's already within the tool with maybe some tweaks to the way that it's already set up. Okay, let's move on to our next poll question. How do visuals figure into your design strategy? Do you think that they're A, a must-have? They help tell the story and provide learners with additional reference points. B, they're a nice-to-have. If you've got visuals, you'll use them, but you don't go out of your way to include them. Or C, visuals aren't part of my design strategy. They're too time-consuming or too expensive.
You guys are pretty quick to respond on these ones. We'll give you just a few more seconds to vote here. How do visuals figure into your design strategy? All right, we'll close this out in about 3 seconds. All right, and here's those results. 89%, just about 90% of our audience say that they're must-have, 10% say that they're nice-to-have, and 1% says visuals are not a part of my design strategy.
Okay. So with visuals can either be a good thing or a bad thing. They're great if they help enhance your story and help the learner connect to what it is that you're talking about. They're not great if they distract from whatever it is that the message that you're trying to convey. And that's pretty self-explanatory. The biggest thing with the visuals is that they really do add credibility and add a level of professionalism to your course. So if it's appropriate, definitely include them. Okay, here's an example of a good visual versus a bad visual. I think, I like to bake and cook, and I'm always looking at these great, amazing visuals. We've got the yummy side, and then somebody posts a picture on Pinterest or something to where they followed the same recipe, but it's not the same result. Same thing is true with visuals. And it says at the top, bad visuals, but these are actually examples of good visuals and simple things that you could do with visuals to really enhance your content. So, for example, if you've got a lot of statistics that you need to cover within a particular course, one simple way is an infographic. You've got a basic picture in the background that's kind of forming the foundation of your image or the foundation of your graphic, and then just some simple iconography. You can source these from places. I know we actually at eLearning Brothers have an amazing icon library. I'm in there pretty much every day grabbing assets for our courses, but there's other sources as well. Iconography is a great way to really help tell the story and provide some visuals to your learner, and is maybe a little bit different of an experience than what they're used to, but really helps you get your story across. Another example, and this is another type of infographic, just a little bit different. We've got this one was created for a sample course where the learners stepped into a business, and they were kind of a business owner and made decisions for the business. And so I created a story about a narrative about, you know, the business and kind of the history of it, what they do, details about the business demographic and things like that. And that was just really easily and quickly conveyed in a simple graphic like this to provide the learner with some context before they actually started on the interaction. Here's another example of ways that you can use visuals, just simple carousel types of interactions. With this particular interaction, as the carousel changed and the learner clicked from left to right, the visual changed, and then the narrator provided some additional insight and information about what was going on in the background, or, you know, what the visual was about. Okay, and then this one, with this particular one, this one was about the history of a company, and rather than doing a timeline and things like that, we kind of did a timeline just through showing it through the years. So for example, in the 1930s, it might have been the wallpaper on the wall. The 60s and 70s would have been, you know, the old black and white TV. Early, you know, 1904 would have been record players. 40s and 50s, jukebox, things like that. So it's still a timeline. We're still representing the company, the history of the company, but we're also putting it in the context of what the media would have been like in that kind of a generation, and just different ways to leverage the visuals. I think, for example, in this particular interaction, when the learner dragged the, gosh, it feels like forever ago, the VCR, the tape to the VCR, it played a commercial for that particular company on the TV. Kind of a unique way to use visuals and connect the learner with that time in history. And then also the way that you use your maps and your menus. This particular image was used for the map for a course, and as they finished each section, they were brought back to the menu. So rather than having it be a drop-down menu, it was, you know, they click on each of these sections to go to the different things within the course. So that's, again, just a little bit different variety, something that your learners might not be expecting, and allows them to see things a little bit differently. And then one more example of good visuals is with this particular course, it was a software simulation type of course, demoing how to use a particular type of software. And we created the scenario where this particular character, the female in the scene, she was receiving an email from a colleague, and rather than just having it, you know, the email pop up, we actually kind of got to see an over-the-shoulder type of view from that particular character, as if we were kind of peeking over her shoulder, seeing the email that came in. Okay, before we move on, any other questions, thoughts, suggestions for the other participants in the group as far as how you use visuals, how you leverage visuals, where you find visuals? I know that visuals can sometimes be time-consuming in order to make and create. Any suggestions for getting visuals put into your course or applying them?
While you guys are putting together suggestions, there's a question here from David that I think is a little bit universal.
Okay.
All of the training content I create is technical and factual information. Aside from things like flow or infrastructure diagrams, I kind of draw a blank when it comes to engaging visuals. For user interface, show and tell, screencasting is my go-to, but for some of the instructor-led factual background info, I'm probably falling short of what could be. How do you deal with that kind of a challenge?
So if it's instructor-led training, I'm more of using the visuals to support. I'm not a huge fan of PowerPoint within the instructor-led courses, aside from kind of helping us get from activity to activity and section to section. I think with it being technical information, maybe infographics might be a way to go. And then depending on the type of software and things like that, maybe you're leveraging pictures of the actual tools, giving them the opportunity to kind of dive in and do some of those simulations and things like that, the things that they'll actually be seeing once they're in the tool and using it, giving them the opportunity to drill down and click and reveals, exploratory hotspots, things like that. I hope that answers your question. If not, maybe circle back and we can maybe go over some options for you on how to apply that. Any other questions?
Yeah, another question has come up. They say, how do you ensure, or is it important for your learners to be familiar with your themes, such as Carmen Sandiego or Operation? I mean, if you're trying to reach a broader audience, and Carmen Sandiego is now an older theme.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that, or is that a problem?
Yeah. So that's a great question, because you're right. Carmen Sandiego isn't necessarily relevant. So it's all in the way that you do the theme. So for example, Carmen Sandiego is kind of the inspiration for the course, but what the course actually ended up being, there wasn't a Carmen Sandiego type of character in there. I think the biggest thing is that you have to weave your story from the beginning, throughout the middle, and throughout. You have to continue to pull that thread through. That was one of the first things when I first started doing themed courses is making sure that the theme went all the way through the course. And you do that through storytelling, right? The basic elements of storytelling. So you introduce the theme, you introduce the task at hand, you give them a situation or a problem that they need to resolve, and then you kind of pull it through the course. And then you want to make sure that as you're doing your activities and things like that, they all kind of relate back to that. And then when you wrap up the course, you give them that kind of, they saved the day, or maybe they made too many mistakes and so they need to go back and retry it again, whatever that might be. But the way that you write your narration is really what's going to help pull that through. So it's not necessarily that they know that the inspiration for the course was Carmen Sandiego. If a theme is done right, they don't necessarily, like, they see it in the examples that you create, the activities that you do. You connect those dots for them with the way that you write your course. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our next topic. And we've got our next poll question. How often do you get course design feedback from your stakeholders? Is it A, throughout the whole process from the start when you're initially concepting it, during the design phase, and then maybe an alpha and beta review at the end? Do you share it with them at the beginning and the end? Do you maybe try to avoid getting that feedback because you're the instructional designer developer, you know what good learning is? Or is it maybe D, your course designs don't really need stakeholder approval, and as a result, you rarely get feedback? Go ahead and pick your answer.
Everyone at the polls, one of these is a leader, and there's definitely one of these that's far ahead of the others.
Okay, great.
Nobody really tries to avoid it. Looks like we got
good.
Maybe one vote on that one. A poor relationship with stakeholders or some other holdup making you avoid reaching out to your stakeholders. All right, we'll go ahead and close this out. Here's those results.
Okay, great.
So 61%, they check back throughout the whole process. 30% share the concept at the beginning, at the end, and 9% don't need any approval.
Okay. So ideally, especially if you're starting to do some of the creative theming and apply different visuals and variety and things like that. If this is new to your organization and you haven't necessarily done this before, you'll definitely want to make sure that you're getting that approval beginning, middle, and end. I personally, with the way that we do our custom courses, we do it at the beginning, middle, and end, just so that we make sure that we're on the right track and save time later. But you definitely want to make sure that you're getting that incremental sign off. I think in a lot of cases we've all, and I know pretty early on when I was designing a course, I created this carnival theme for an organization that didn't really have a ton of, I wouldn't say variety. They had a little bit of variety, but they definitely didn't have some of the out-of-the-box thinking and concepting that I was initially proposing. And so I went to my major stakeholder and I gave him my ideas, and I thought he was going to love it, and it absolutely fell flat. He looked at me like I was crazy. And I probably was a little bit, because it was definitely out of the box. But it wasn't aligned with what he was thinking. And so when you get those incremental sign-offs at the beginning, middle, and end, if nothing else, it prevents you from having that aha moment at the very end, and you're thinking it's the most amazing thing that you've ever created, and they just aren't having anything to do with it. So instead of having that ah moment, you have this. I don't like the way it looks. This is way too long. Feels a little bit cheesy in tone. This isn't the messaging we want to be sending. For example, the course that I wanted to do the carnival interaction on, it was a course about safety and security, and the themes didn't really mesh with the messaging that they wanted to be sending. And again, some of those things you'll learn the hard way. Hopefully you are able to take something from this, and you get the incremental sign off at the beginning when you're thinking about these themes. So within your incremental sign-off arsenal, there's a variety of different things that you have. And depending on the complexity of your project, one might be more appropriate than others. If you're doing more like a quick and dirty course, you just need to get the information out there, and it doesn't necessarily require a whole ton of extra sign-off and things like that. Maybe it is just an outline where you cover off on your topics, the sequence that you're going to use, cover off on your objectives that you're going to include in the course, so that you're making sure that you're assessing the right things, and that at the end of the course your learners are going to walk away from it with what they need to take away from it. The next option would be a design strategy, and that would be the program level plans, your objectives, your basic content, the types of activities that you might want to include. And we talked about design strategy in part 1 of this section. So if you're not really sure about what a design strategy might look like, or ways to start incorporating one, take a look at part 1 of the elements of instructional design periodic table, and we give some great information on that. Okay, we also talked about the blueprint in that section as well. With the blueprint is going to be one step further than a design strategy. So the way that I look at these, the outline is just kind of a very high level overview, not a lot of detail, kind of like if you were writing a paper for school, an outline of what you might want to put in your paper. That's kind of what an outline for an e-learning course or an instructor-led training outline might look like, very high level, to show the topic and the sequence and things like that. Your design strategy is going to maybe go in a little bit further. You're going to include the types of training activities that you want to use in order to make sure that you're meeting your objectives. You're going to dive a little bit deeper. You'll include some basic content. You might think about the topics and the way that you're going to approach different things. And then that blueprint is going to take it one step further, where you fully designed it out. It's like a blueprint for if you were a designer and an architecture, doing the architectural design for a house. You would want it to be that detailed, so that if somebody else if you were to step away from needing to build whatever it is, somebody else were to pick it up, they would know how to build your course or design your course, create your course, because they've got that fully scripted design blueprint right there. You've got your partial scripts, you've got your visual references and seat time, how long it will take to go from activity to activity, things like that. Your next thing that you'll want to include is a look and feel. And if your organization or if the team that you're working with already has a look and feel, great. You don't need to get that approved necessarily, but you want to make sure that the courses that you're creating or designing align to that look and feel, especially if you're doing something a little bit outside of the box. If you're doing a Carmen Sandiego theme or spy theme or some other type of theme that doesn't necessarily fall into what the normal look and feel might be considered to be part of that, you'll want to make sure that your stakeholders are okay with that and you get it signed up from the appropriate people. You also have the option to do wireframe storyboards. So, and I'll provide an example of what this looks like here in just a minute, but you don't necessarily, if you're doing a storyboard, you don't necessarily need to have all of your visuals and everything in there. But you would want to do your script, make sure that you've got your developer notes and things like that in there so that when you do turn it over to somebody, whether that's the stakeholders looking at the vision or the developer themselves, they know the direction that you're going and how they can proceed forward. And then the next potential sign-off option would be full visual storyboard, and that's essentially just a static prototype of whatever your course might be. So we do, for our eLearning Brothers custom side of the house, we do visual storyboards for probably 95% of our courses, and the biggest reason for that is it is as close as our clients are going to be to an actual working prototype or what they're going to get within their course before that we actually turn it over to production and start developing it. And we catch a lot of things in that stage with that visual storyboard that may not be caught otherwise. And that's the biggest reason why we use them, is because that allows people and the stakeholders to see it, feel it, touch it. If something doesn't feel right, look right, we can catch it there before it actually goes into development. So let me show you what an example of that wireframe might look like. So as you can see, it's very basic. There's no color on the screen, but what you do have is the location of where the image will go. This particular interaction is just a simple question and answer. Are you okay with the situation? Or are you okay with what's going on? It gives all of the narration, the feedback that the learner will receive when they make their decision. That would be a wireframe, a high-level wireframe of what you could do. And then here would be an example of the visual storyboard. So this is fully boarded out. You've got your imagery on the screen. You've got all of your developer notes, what happens when the learner clicks on a particular button. You've got your developer notes on the side, and then your narration and transcript down at the bottom. For those of you that want to do a visual storyboard and maybe haven't gotten started yet, on our website there is a visual storyboard template that you're able to download in the freebies section. So definitely take a look and check it out. It's already set up with the developer notes section, the narrator and transcript section, and all of that ready for you to go. So check that out if you're interested. And then here is an example of what a look and feel might look like. So for example, it gives you what the feedback will look like, what the fonts will look like, characters, if you're using characters, what the distractors will look like, all of that. And it gives your stakeholders the opportunity to say, yeah, I like that, or no, I didn't realize that we were using realistic imagery along with iconography. Let's try something else, or whatever it might be. Okay, that was a mouthful about incremental sign-off. What questions do you guys have about incremental sign-off?
When it comes to excuse me, when it comes to creating that full visual storyboard, are you building that inside of an authoring tool? Are you building that in PowerPoint? Are you building that in Word?
Great question. It could be any or all of the above. At eLearning Brothers, we build them in PowerPoint. The biggest reason being is it's more of a universal tool. And when we send it over to our stakeholders for review or our clients for review, I can't think of a time in the past where we've had a client that didn't have PowerPoint, so it's just the easiest for us to send over. The biggest reason why we don't build them in a tool is when we send them over, not all of our stakeholders will necessarily have that tool installed on their machine. I mean, I guess if you publish it out, they could potentially look at it that way and view it that way. But it's easiest for us that we have it built in PowerPoint, but any of those are an option. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. Okay, our last poll question, warm handoffs. As a project progresses, how do you transition it between people? A, an in-person meeting to discuss the key items, considerations, and any known roadblocks for success. B, a detailed email message that includes all of the pertinent information. Or C, toss it over the fence and allow the person to ask questions if they run into issues later.
Now, another question has come up.
Okay.
We'll take this question while people are polling. What are tips for effectively and efficiently capturing and reviewing feedback?
A couple of things. So ideally, if they can combine it all into a single spreadsheet or document so that you don't have a single source or a single point of contact that goes through and eliminates duplicates and things like that. One of the ways that we do that is through a Google document. So for example, when we send over our storyboards, we have a Google document created and the stakeholders put their feedback in that Google document. Also put a deadline on it, just let them know that we need to have specific feedback and let them know when that deadline is. And then also having that meeting ahead of time before you turn over your storyboard or whatever it might be, whatever that deliverable is, provide them the context of what type of feedback that you're looking for. If it's if the feedback that you're specifically looking for is for look and feel and things like that, yeah, you're going to want feedback on color scheme and fonts and things like that. But if the people that you're sending the document to are more your SMEs for actual content, while you appreciate that they may have a feeling one way or the other towards the color blue or fonts or things like that, that's probably not the best use of their time to be commenting on colors and things like that. So set the expectation of what type of feedback you're needing from them. So that as they're going through, that helps you and that helps them. So that if you're not really relying for them for commentary on look and feel, they're not looking to provide that and they're not wasting your time and theirs.
All right, so coming back to the question at hand, as the project progresses, how do you transition in between people? Here's those results. So 66% of our audience said that they do it in an in-person meeting. 30% said a detailed email message. And 4% said they tossed it over the fence.
Okay. So ideally, as projects transition from person to person, and that includes from instructional designer to client to developer, whatever it might be, whenever possible, set up those meetings to do the warm handoff so that you can talk through the key things and make sure that the progress for the project stays on track. So I think we have all or know somebody that has an inbox kind of like the one that you're seeing on the screen. If you send it in an email format, I'm not saying that you can't do that or that you shouldn't do that. I'm just, talking through the reality that some people have inboxes that look like this. So if that's the case and you do need to send an email, maybe set the expectation ahead of time or give them a heads up that the email is coming, when they should expect it, and the appropriate method to get in contact with you if they do have questions or, need to follow up with you on what the next steps are in order to move that project forward. But ideally, you're going to want to have that in-person meeting, either virtually through a web-based communication like this, if you're not in the same room or not within the same location, but give them the opportunity to look at everything with you in a real-time environment. This will allow you to cut through the clutter, allow them to ask any questions that they might have. It will also give you the opportunity to do that high-level overview and set the stage. What is the project about? Why is it important? And this is more for the instructional designer toward the developer, or maybe it's a high-level overview if you're the instructional designer / developer. You want to give them a high-level overview of your vision, and hopefully if you've done those incremental sign-offs along the way, they're already going to know some of that, but this also helps you to level set that stage of what they're going to see when they look through the document or the deliverable, and then also, to set those expectations of what it is that you're looking for with what it is that you need them to do. This will also allow you to call their attention to any sticky spots or anything, especially if it's a developer, any interactions that might be more time consuming, or the ones that maybe you had conversations about, and you can quickly call their attention to something that they might struggle with, or if you know that 50% of their time is going to be built on 2 interactions, this will allow you to focus in on those 2 interactions, make sure that they thoroughly understand it, get as many questions answered as you can up front as soon as possible, so that when they get to those slides, they're not waiting for you. They send you an email and they're kind of waiting for you to respond, or text message, or whatever it might be. That helps to set them up for success. Or, if it's the stakeholder and they're reviewing that slide, they're not going to get to it and be like, what was this? I have no idea what this is. You've already had the opportunity to walk them through it or talk them through it with that warm handoff. And then it also gives you the opportunity to clarify what input you need from them at this stage. If it's feedback, if it's just, you're sending it for initial review and you need their feedback on content, or make sure that the scenarios are ringing true, whatever it might be, this gives you the opportunity to clarify that. Or maybe it's final approval, right? Maybe you've already built the course, it's developed, it's within the authoring tool, it's beautiful, you've published it. Then at that point, hey, you know what? We've already come this far. You've agreed to everything. We're really looking for your final approval at this point, and let them know that's what you're looking for. So it allows you to set that stage. And then it also gives you the opportunity to set whatever expectations are, and give them the opportunity, and you the opportunity, to commit to whatever that turnaround time is, so that you can keep the project moving. If you're on a super tight turnaround time and you need their feedback by end of business day tomorrow, then that gives you the opportunity to say, hey, you know what, I get that you've got 50 people that need to review this. I need this back tomorrow. Is that doable? And if it's not doable, then that gives you the opportunity to have that conversation and say, okay, if it's not doable, when is it doable? And hopefully you've already talked through some of that ahead of time a little bit, so that it's not a surprise. But that also gives you that last chance to get them to commit on when they can have that feedback back to you. Okay, questions on warm handoffs, either internal or external? And maybe some of the things that you've run into, questions about getting that approval, or situations that you've run into that you're having a hard time getting around.
Let's see. We got 2 questions that have come up. One is, during your sign-offs, how do you deal with multiple instances of scope creep?
Yeah, so scope creep is always, I shouldn't say it's always going to be a thing, but it's always a risk, right? And so it's to have those conversations early and often, and just lay it out there for them to say, and give the stakeholders the opportunity to make that decision, right? And present all of the options to them so that they can make an informed decision. So we can move forward with the project the way it is, and we keep this particular scope creep item out, and maybe we put that in the next iteration, or do we delay the launch of the project so that we can get them in, or C, do we just scrap it all together? So you want to make sure that you're presenting it in a way that allows them to feel like they have the opportunity to provide their input, and ultimately they're the stakeholders, they have that final decision, but just make sure that they understand the implications of whatever that might be with whatever their decision is, but allow them to make that decision.
Another question from Carolyn. As a graphic designer, how do you encourage the instructional designer to include you in the development process? I usually get to catch it after it comes over the fence.
Yeah. That's the process of setting those expectations and getting into those habits ahead of time. You know, coming from the instructional design perspective, I know that my strongest suit isn't the graphic design. If it was, I'd probably be doing the graphic design, right? And so it's just building that relationship and letting them know that you want to be a partner and an ally. I hate knowing that that I have put something in a course that our graphic designers can't either create or replicate or just don't have any solutions for. And so I like to involve them. We involve them early and often in that initial planning phase because they're such a valuable asset and resource. But it's just having those conversations and establishing that trust ahead of time, and just making it part of that process to say, hey, you know what, I'm not here to step on your toes. I'm not, you know, here to design the course. I'm here to help add value, and help make the course be the best that it can be. How can I help you allow me to help you? And I think that can go a long way, but it's about establishing that relationship. Okay. Again, just a quick reminder, if you want to download the periodic table of instructional design, it's on the website. Any other final questions before we close out for today?
Yeah, we've got a couple questions here.
Okay.
How do you track time on task when using interactions with a lot of different content to explore? This is important when designing a course for which there are time on task tracking per accreditation standards.
So there's a couple of ways that you can do that. I mean, obviously you've got the features that are within the rapid authoring tools that don't allow them to advance forward unless they've spent a certain amount of time on that particular slide. That's one way to do it. You know, you can lock it down and make sure that they, you know, click and open each thing. At my heart, I know that that's, you know, not the most effective way for learners to learn. Exploring is you know, definitely preferred, and not having those requirements. But again, for accreditation and things like that, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But that would be my suggestion, is maybe locking items down and making sure that they've explored everything before they move forward, and if need be, you know, lock it down until they've you know, met a certain time frame, and then allow them to move forward.
Sure, great. That's all the time we have for questions. We have tons and tons of questions, and I'll make sure that these get put in front of Jen to potentially answer later. I do want to draw your attention here, though, to the iPad here on the screen. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we are giving away 15 iPads. We're giving away one every business day for the first 3 weeks of December. In order to be registered for that, by the way, it's 1 in 48. We're going to give away one iPad a day with 48 potential registration slots. So register early so you can get in there. And so that information is there on the screen. In order to register, just go to elearningbrothers.com/webinar iPad giveaway 2018. And I will also post a link to that in an email that I'll send out to you guys later today. We'll also get that posted on our blog and the recap, and we'll make sure that you guys, if you're interested in winning a free iPad, you can get access to that. Thank you so much, Jen, for your time. This has been extremely useful. Everybody's learned a lot, and like I said, there's a lot of questions that we'll make sure we get in front of you. Thanks, everybody, and we hope you have a great day.